I've already covered Ex Machina, Alex Garland's very first feature film as a director, so now it's time to talk about an arguably more ambitious follow-up with Annihilation. Let's get into it. Just full disclosure, before we get into this, I will be talking about the ending of this movie. It's really hard to talk about Annihilation without spoiling it, so I'm going to be doing that. Full spoiler warning. So this is yet another trip into the sci-fi genre from Alex Garland. This is very different though in its approach. It's far more ambitious. It's less claustrophobic in a sense, as these characters are out in the open, but in a way they are still in a very isolated space that does make it feel claustrophobic. However, the themes that we're dealing with here are completely different, and the way that this approaches its narrative, it really swings for the fences. And you've begun to see that a little bit more in Alex Garland's filmography. This is where it truly starts. Ex Machina is a lot more simple in its approach, and I think it's much more accessible than Annihilation. But if you're someone who loves a deeper themed story with a lot of questions to ask and talk about, this film is for you, because Annihilation is insanely good at doing that. This film starts off very mysterious. We follow our protagonist, played by Natalie Portman, who I might add is incredible in this film. One of my favorite performances from her is in this very movie. And we don't know too much about her. We see her husband come home. He's a veteran. And then he starts coughing up blood. Then in the ambulance, she's cut off and they're taken to a secret facility. And then we get all of these questions and this big sci-fi narrative starts. And we have a little bit more of an ensemble here. Firstly, Natalie Portman's husband, played by Oscar Isaac, is brilliant in this movie, but he's very mysterious as a character. We're trying to figure out what happened to him. Why is he in this state? And then the film slowly starts to give you answers while they go on this journey, because he is involved in the same mission that Natalie Portman is now undertaking. The beginning of the film, some kind of meteorite hits a lighthouse, and then we get this big alien effect that they call the shimmer, and it's growing and growing and growing, and we don't have a lot of answers here. There's scientists near this event and they're trying to figure it out. So they send Natalie Portman and this crew inside the shimmer to investigate. And that is where the sci-fi elements begin. Alex Garland starts getting freaky with it, and you get so much mysterious sci-fi goodness that I absolutely adore. I would say the biggest weak spot to this movie is the ensemble. To me, I think that while the characters do a lot in justifying the themes of the story and trying to explain what is going on here, as each of them have a different problem that they're tackling, and each get taken up and consumed by this world in very different ways. So that is fascinating, but the characters themselves are pretty generic for the most part. When they died in this movie, I wasn't really feeling anything. There's only 2 to maybe 3 characters in this little ensemble that I actually cared about. Natalie Portman, the protagonist, I of course am fascinated by this character and her past that this film really likes to explore. Jennifer Jason Leigh is also very fascinating as a character, as she's so determined to get to the lighthouse by any means possible. And you're trying to figure out why she's so driven to do this. And Tessa Thompson, I thought that her character gives you a lot of context for this world, and her character is someone that you can easily empathize with. For the most part, when this film is progressing, it feels very safe as a movie at times, and you could almost say it feels generic. This film is far from that, especially when we get deeper into the movie. So it kind of lulls you into a false sense of security as you're trying to figure out what's going on, and as the story unfolds. But it almost feels like one of those monster movies where the whole ensemble gets picked off one by different ways, and then you get left with the last 2 characters. That is almost identical to how this film progresses. There's some very creative kills in this, some very creative monsters that are very different. One that stands out is this bear hybrid that can mimic the voices of others, and it traps one into thinking that it's one of the crew, and then it attacks. I think that was really an interesting kind of creature, and Alex Garland does a great job of utilizing it within this film. There's a very tense scene where they're all strapped to a chair and the bear is right there. It's just walking around them, mimicking the screams. It's so tense. You feel it. And I just love a scene that can get that feeling from you, that has you on the edge of your seat, that makes you almost physically sit still and quieten up straight away. I love those kinds of scenes, and I think Alex Garland does that to perfection in this little sequence. I also need to add that there is some really great body horror in here. You kind of see him take that to the next level in his next film, Men, but in here, there's some really great moments that will make you squirm. There's one that happens with Oscar Isaac's character with some snakes that, oh my god, it's something else. But enough about all of that, because what makes this movie as special as it is the final act. This is the make or break point. For some, they're going to think it goes way too far into a wacky direction and completely give up. It's what makes it difficult for me to recommend it to everyone, because some people just aren't on board for this kind of thing. But for others that love this form of storytelling, you're in for a treat. So when Natalie Portman gets to the lighthouse, we start almost getting more questions than answers, but they focus, and it really covers the whole thesis of this movie, I think, which is the way that people self-destruct. A lot of people self-destruct in many other ways, and the film adequately explains this throughout the way that the film progresses, throughout our characters' actions, that I really thought was powerful and fascinating. Natalie Portman encounters this alien that you can tell is mimicking people. And we also have this cutting back and forth throughout the film where Natalie Portman is being interviewed after the events of this movie. And you start to see certain details on this character that weren't on Natalie Portman originally. I must also add that the score that is playing during the sequence where Natalie Portman meets this alien is terrific. It is otherworldly and really captures that sci-fi aesthetic that it really wants to nail. You know for a fact that this alien mimicked Oscar Isaac's character and is now impersonating him. The version that we saw at the beginning of this movie is the alien, because you have this camera footage that clearly illustrates that. To me, there's no questions whether Oscar Isaac is an alien or not. The human version died and this alien has taken over. It's with Natalie Portman's character that the questions are forming here, because you see it start to take her form, but it looks like she escapes. She blows it up with this light grenade thing, and you think it's gone, it's dead, and we get back to the Natalie Portman that is being interviewed. However, the very final shot of this movie, she encounters Oscar Isaac once again and basically says, "You're not the real person, you're the alien." And he's unsure of that. Then they hug and you see Oscar Isaac's eyes shimmer and change colors, and Natalie Portman's character does the exact same thing. To me, that almost cements that she is the alien. I think that's Alex Garland giving you the answer there, but I don't think that is the whole thesis of this movie. It's not a mystery in that sense. It is a really cool twist, and it almost innovates in a sense with the unreliable narrator trope within this movie, because you see that play out constantly. This story is being told by Natalie Portman's character in these interviews, which we have just seen is the alien. So because the alien is unsure of itself and has completely taken over this character's memories, she thinks she's the real version. That's the same reason why Oscar Isaac's character says he's not sure, because he's completely taken over this character's memories and thinks that they're the real thing. I absolutely love that kind of twist. I think it almost feels reminiscent of a good M. Night Shyamalan twist, where it turns everything on its head and it completely changes your perspective of the movie, the way that it progressed, the way that the story unfolded, and the way that these characters are approaching certain scenarios. You don't know what's true by the end of the movie, because this whole thing has been told by an unreliable narrator. And I love that trope. And it gives you so many questions and a good conversation points at the end of the movie. And I think it was a brilliant way of approaching a screenplay in a very innovative sense within this sci-fi genre. But to me, this ending does confirm this thesis of the way that different people self-destruct. All these characters went out in very different ways, and they were all based around the traits that almost defined them. You had one that was incredibly anxious and was already on the verge of ending it all, and when the movie gets to a really tense point, they kind of embrace the end, and that's it. You see one that is very distrustful because of their past, doing that once again to their detriment. Natalie Portman's character is someone that would fight to the very end for what she believes in and her pursuit of knowledge. And she does that to her detriment. I just really love the way that this tells a story without actually telling it to you. It shows you everything. And that might be too much for a lot of people because they're not going to get that out of this movie. This movie has a lot for you to interpret. And there are different things to explore here. There's also another facet of this movie about our perception of threats. Just because we're scared of something, does that instantly make it a threat? Or is it actually something that isn't threatening at all, except we're just scared of it? There's so many different aspects to this screenplay and this narrative that makes it so complex while bottling it in a very simple structure. And I think Alex Garland did a tremendous job with this film. Overall, while a lot more complex than Ex Machina and definitely less accessible, I think this film is phenomenal. There are a couple of hiccups here and there with the pacing in the earlier moments of the film, and as I said, some of the characters in this ensemble more feed the themes of the narrative rather than be great characters on their own. So that is a little bit of a detriment there. But overall, this thing is excellent, with one of the best endings of a movie that you could ever watch. It's so divisive, it's so original, it's so daring, and I love that. That's what I really appreciate about Alex Garland's work. Whether you love his stuff or hate it, he is making original movies with original ideas that you've just never seen before. And it is such a shame that he's going to be retiring from directing. As a score, I'm going to give Annihilation a strong 4.5 out of 5. I was so close to giving this a 5, but as I said, those minor hiccups cost it a little bit. But I highly recommend you check this one out if you haven't seen it already. And those are my thoughts towards Annihilation. Let me know what you think about this movie in the comments below. I'd love to hear your discussion points, your interpretation of the ending, because my interpretation isn't right. This is an open book discussion that Alex Garland wants us to have. We're all going to pull different things from the movie. That's what I pulled from it. Let me know what you pulled from it in the comments below. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.